On a grey morning, a powerful businessman realizes that not even his empire can soothe his mother's silent pain. When he marries a refined and flawless woman in the eyes of the world, he unknowingly awakens a silent tension that turns his home into a place of fear. Disguised as a driver, he hears the cruel truth his mother never dared to speak, and chooses to act. What begins as a quest for justice unveils a new love, a new family, and a chance at redemption, even for those once thought unforgivable. The rain lashed against the windows of the penthouse in the Peninsula Tower, in the South Beach neighborhood of Miami Beach, Florida. The dark morning sky seemed to reflect Graham Montgomery's state of mind as he watched the city below, a landscape of concrete and sea that blurred into the mist. At 45, Graham was the kind of man who made an impression, tall with an athletic build even without time for the gym, graying hair at his temples that gave him an air of respect, and sharp brown eyes that few could face in a negotiation. Owner of Montgomery Constructions, one of the largest construction firms in Miami, Graham had achieved everything a man could materially desire. His company erected skyscrapers that reshaped the Miami skyline. He had money, prestige, imported cars in the garage, international trips on his resume. But that morning, like so many others, a single thought occupied his mind, the sadness in his mother's eyes. Mrs. Louise. "Darling, coffee is ready." The soft voice of Penelope, his wife of only 8 months, interrupted his thoughts. Tall, elegant, with always impeccable black hair and perfectly manicured nails, Penelope Vance Montgomery was 34 and came from a traditional family in Palm Beach. The daughter of a retired diplomat, she had studied at the best schools, spoke 4 languages, and had that air of sophistication that only comes with breeding. At least that's what Graham believed. "Thank you, I'll be right there," Graham replied without taking his eyes off the view. Penelope approached and hugged him from behind, her expensive perfume filling the air. "You're worried about your mother again, aren't you?" "Yes." "She seems more withdrawn, sadder every day." "It's natural, dear. Since your father passed, she's never been the same. Give it time." Penelope kissed his shoulder and moved away, her heels echoing on the marble floor. "I'll be in the dining room." Graham closed his eyes for a moment. His father, Edward Montgomery, had passed away 2 years ago after an accident at one of his building sites. The irony was not lost on Graham. The man who had built a real estate empire had his life cut short by the very thing that made him prosper. Since then, Mrs. Louise, now 72, seemed to have lost her will to live. She used crutches due to advanced arthritis and rarely left her room except for physical therapy sessions 3 times a week. Graham had hoped that his marriage to Penelope would bring new life to his mother. After all, the house needed a young female presence, someone who could keep Mrs. Louise company when he was busy with the company. Penelope seemed perfect, educated, cultured, patient. Besides being a trained nurse, though she had never practiced, she would know how to take good care of an elderly woman. But to his surprise, since Penelope's arrival, Mrs. Louise had become even more introspective. In the dining room, Penelope flipped through a design magazine while sipping her coffee. Constance, the housekeeper who had worked for the Montgomery family for almost 20 years, was serving toast and jam. "Good morning, my son." Mrs. Louise entered, leaning on her crutches, her frail body moving with difficulty. She wore a navy blue silk robe, a gift from Graham, but it seemed too large for her body, now diminished by time. "Mom!" Graham stood up immediately and went to help her. "You should have called me. I would have helped you down." "No need, son. Constance helped me, and I need to move. The doctor said so." She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Louise," Penelope said, without looking up from her magazine. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." The short reply and the way Mrs. Louise avoided looking at Penelope did not go unnoticed by Graham. Constance served the matriarch's coffee while casting a worried glance at Graham. The housekeeper, a middle-aged black woman with graying curly hair and a warm smile, was more than an employee. She was practically family. "Today is physical therapy day, isn't it, Mrs. Louise?" Constance asked, gently placing the porcelain cup in front of her employer. "Yes, at 10 o'clock, Mrs. Louise replied, her voice gaining a slight tone of animation. "It's the only time of the week I feel useful." Penelope closed the magazine with a sharp movement. "What nonsense, Mrs. Louise. You don't need to feel useful. We're here to take care of you. Isn't that right, Graham?" "Of course, but I understand what my mother means." Graham replied, feeling a slight irritation at Penelope's condescending tone. "We all need to feel productive, regardless of age." "Well, I'm going up to get ready for physical therapy," Mrs. Louise said, making a move to stand. "I'll help you, Mrs. Louise," Constance offered promptly. "No need, Constance," Penelope intervened. "I'll help my mother-in-law myself, after all, I'm a nurse, remember? And you have plenty to do in the kitchen." Constance hesitated, looking at Mrs. Louise, who suddenly seemed tense. "As you wish, Mrs. Penelope." When the two women left the room, Constance approached Graham and spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Graham, may I have a private word with you?" "Of course, Constance. Is something wrong?" "Not here." The housekeeper glanced nervously at the door. "When Mrs. Penelope isn't around." Graham felt a tightness in his chest. "Does this have to do with my mother?" Constance just nodded, her eyes conveying a concern that sent a chill down Graham's spine. Hours later, Graham was in his office at Montgomery Constructions, a modern commercial building in Brickell, trying to focus on the projects before him, but his mind kept wandering to the interrupted conversation with Constance. What did the housekeeper want to tell him about his mother? And why did she seem so afraid to speak in Penelope's presence? His cell phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Joseph, the private driver who took Mrs. Louise to her physical therapy sessions. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm terribly sorry, but I need a week off. My sister in New Orleans has had a health problem, and I need to go see her urgently." "Of course, Joseph, don't worry, family comes first. I hope your sister gets well soon." "Thank you, sir. I've already arranged for a reliable substitute to take Mrs. Louise to physical therapy. It's my cousin, Charles. He's also a professional driver and very responsible." Graham thanked him and hung up. It was then that an idea began to form in his mind. What if, instead of Joseph's cousin, he himself played the role of the substitute driver, with a simple disguise, a bit of stubble, sunglasses, a cap? His mother probably wouldn't recognize him. It would be a perfect opportunity to observe her away from Penelope's watch, perhaps to find out what was going on. The idea was absurd, something out of a movie or a soap opera, but something inside him, an instinct perhaps, told him that something was wrong in that house, something his mother and Constance were afraid to reveal. What if his hasty marriage to Penelope had been a mistake? What if that seemingly perfect woman hid a face she only showed when he wasn't around? Decided, Graham called Joseph again and said he would arrange a substitute himself. Then he called his secretary and cancelled all his appointments for the next few days. "Family matters," he justified. He would get to the bottom of this story, even if it meant becoming someone else. That evening, when he arrived home, he found Penelope and Mrs. Louise in the living room. His mother seemed particularly downcast. "How was physical therapy today, Mom?" he asked, kissing her forehead. "It was normal," Mrs. Louise replied, avoiding her son's gaze. "Dr. Morris said she's progressing well," Penelope added, smiling sweetly. "Isn't that right, Mrs. Louise?" "Yes, that's what he says." The answer came out almost as a whisper. Graham noticed his mother was gripping her crutches tightly, as if afraid someone would take them. Her eyes, once lively, now seemed dull, distant. What was happening here, under his own roof, without his knowledge? That same night, he decided to put his plan into action. Tomorrow he would be the one to take his mother to the physical therapy clinic, and perhaps finally he would discover the truth everyone seemed to be hiding from him. If this story has caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The stubble, sunglasses, and a driver's uniform transformed Graham Montgomery into someone unrecognizable. In the mirror of a gas station restroom near his home, he barely recognized himself. The powerful Miami businessman had given way to a simple ride-share driver. He completed the disguise with a Miami Heat cap and a fake wedding ring, details that would justify any questions about his personal life. He parked the car, a simpler model he kept in the garage for situations requiring discretion, a block away from the Peninsula Tower. His heart was pounding as he called Penelope. "Good morning, darling. Joseph's replacement should be arriving soon. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it home for lunch today. I have an important meeting with investors." "That's all right, love. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your mother," Penelope replied in the syrupy voice she always used on the phone with him. 15 minutes later, Graham parked in front of the building and sent a text to his mother's phone. "Mrs. Louise Montgomery, Your driver is waiting in the black car, license plate LVM 4578. Through the mirrored lobby doors, he saw Penelope and Mrs. Louise exit the elevator. His mother looked even more fragile in the daylight. Penelope, impeccable as always in an expensive dress, held Mrs. Louise's arm firmly. Too firmly, Graham noted, seeing his wife's white knuckles digging into the elderly woman's thin arm. "Here we are, Mother. Are you the driver replacing Joseph?" Penelope asked, opening the back door. "Yes, ma'am. Charles Andrews at your service," Graham replied, disguising his voice. He felt Penelope's eyes sizing him up for a few seconds. "Take good care of my mother-in-law. She's very special to us," Penelope said, helping Mrs. Louise into the car. Then she leaned in and whispered something in the elderly woman's ear that Graham couldn't hear, but he clearly saw the way his mother stiffened. "I'll be fine, Penelope. Don't worry," Mrs. Louise replied, trying to smile. As Graham started the car, he watched in the rearview mirror as Penelope's expression changed instantly once the door was closed, the sweet smile giving way to a hard, almost disgusted face before she turned her back and re-entered the building. "Physio Care Clinic in Coconut Grove, please," Mrs. Louise requested in a low voice. "Yes, ma'am." The first few minutes passed in silence. Graham avoided talking much, fearing his mother might recognize his voice. In the rearview mirror, he watched her looking out the window, lost in thought. Her thin fingers nervously caressed her crutches, as if they were a protective talisman. "Do you go to physical therapy often, Mom?" he finally asked, trying to start a casual conversation. "3 times a week. It's important for my legs." "Must be tiring." "Actually, it's the best part of my day," Mrs. Louise replied with a sigh. "There, I can breathe." The choice of words intrigued Graham. Breathe. "Yes, you know, when we get old, people think we no longer have a right to our own space, our own decisions. They treat us like children." "Does your family treat you that way?" There was a hesitation. Mrs. Louise bit her lower lip, looked out the window again. "My son is a good man. He works very hard, always has. Built an empire with his own hands, but he's always busy." "And his wife? Does she help take care of you?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds. In the rearview mirror, Graham saw his mother's eyes fill with tears. "My daughter-in-law, she is—" Mrs. Louise hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "You're not from around here, are you? You don't know my family?" "No, ma'am, I'm Joseph's cousin. Came from Georgia to fill in for him. I don't know anyone in Miami." That information seemed to reassure Mrs. Louise. She looked at the partition between the seats, as if making sure they were truly alone, and then the words began to flow. "My daughter-in-law is a devil dressed as an angel. In front of my son, she's all smiles and kindness, but when we're alone, she humiliates me, says I'm a dead weight, a burden, that the only reason she doesn't put me in a nursing home is because my son would be against it. She hides my crutches when I'm in the shower, so I have to scream for help. Then she comes to save me, so my son thinks she's attentive." Graham felt his blood boil, but he maintained his composure. "Have you told your son about this?" "How could I? She's always around, and on the rare occasions I've managed to be alone with him, she appears out of nowhere, as if she can read my mind. Besides, I have no proof. It would be my word against hers. And she's young, beautiful, educated. Who would believe a confused old woman like me?" "Don't say that, Mrs. Louise. You don't seem confused. She tells my son that too, that I'm getting senile, that I make things up. The other day, my sapphire ring, a gift from my husband, went missing. When I complained, she said I must have lost it, that I was imagining things. 3 days later, the ring appeared on my nightstand. She herself found it and showed it to my son as proof of my confusion." Graham felt a knot in his stomach. How had he not noticed before? How had he been so blind? "And there's more," Mrs. Louise continued, now that the floodgates were open. "Constance, our housekeeper, has seen how she treats me. Once Penelope pushed me because I was slow to get out of her way in the hallway. Constance saw it and tried to intervene. The next day, Penelope threatened to fire her if she told my son anything. Constance is a widow. She has a granddaughter to raise. She can't lose her job." Graham gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The anger he felt was now almost unbearable. He wanted to stop the car, hug his mother, and tell her everything would be okay. but he knew he needed more information, concrete proof. "Why do you think your daughter-in-law does this?" "Money, of course. My son is a very wealthy man. She doesn't love him, never has. She hunted him like a prize. And he, poor thing, was so worried about me after my husband passed that he didn't even notice. He thought she would be company for me. Little does he know, she's my tormentor." They arrived at the physical therapy clinic. Graham quickly got out to help his mother, trying to hide his face. When he handed her over to the receptionist's care, he promised to be back in an hour to pick her up. In the car, alone, Graham finally let the anger and sadness flow. How could he have been so stupid? How had he not seen what was happening under his own roof? Penelope had deceived everyone with her mask of perfection, and now his mother was paying the price. He made a decision right then and there. He needed proof, irrefutable proof of Penelope's cruelty, and he knew exactly how to get it. At an electronics store near the clinic, he bought high-definition micro-cameras and discreet microphones. He knew the house well. After all, he had designed it himself, and knew exactly where to install them so they wouldn't be detected. Behind paintings, inside decorative objects, in strategic places where his mother usually spent her time. An hour later, he returned to pick up Mrs. Louise. She seemed lighter, happier. "Did physical therapy do you good, Mrs. Louise?" he asked, keeping up the charade. "Yes, Dr. Morris is an excellent professional, and the clinic has wonderful people," she replied with a sparkle in her eyes that Graham hadn't seen in a long time. "You know, there I feel like a person, not a burden." On the way back, Mrs. Louise talked enthusiastically about the clinic. She mentioned a young woman named Deborah, who worked in housekeeping there and always treated her with special kindness. "She helps me put my things in the locker, brings me water when I'm thirsty. We talk about plants. I used to love gardening, you know. I have several orchids at home, Penelope said they attracted insects and told Constance to throw them away." Each new revelation was like a stab in Graham's chest. How had he allowed his mother to suffer so much while he was busy with his business? Upon arriving at the Peninsula Tower, Graham noticed the immediate change in his mother's posture. Her relaxed body tensed up again, the smile vanished, her eyes lost their sparkle. It was as if she were entering a prison, not her home. "Thank you for the company, Mr." Mrs. Louise hesitated, realizing she didn't know the supposed driver's name. "Charles. Charles Andrews." "Thank you, Mr. Andrews. It was comforting to be able to talk." Graham nodded, too emotional to speak. He watched as Penelope appeared at the door, a fake smile plastered on her face, and helped Mrs. Louise out of the car with gestures that, to a casual observer, would seem affectionate, but which Graham now clearly saw as controlling. He waited until they were inside the building to drive away. He needed to act fast. That very night, when Penelope was distracted, he would install the cameras, and then finally he would have proof of the hell his mother was living. What had started as a suspicion was now a painful certainty. Penelope Vance was a fraud, a cruel woman who hid her true nature behind a veneer of sophistication and kindness, and Graham was determined to expose that mask, no matter the cost. 3 days had passed since Graham installed the cameras in his penthouse. 3 days of anguish, during which he maintained his driver charade to take his mother to physical therapy. While at night, locked in his office at the company, he watched the recordings with a mixture of horror and growing fury. What he saw was even worse than he had imagined. In the first recording, Penelope entered Mrs. Louise's room without knocking. The elderly woman was sitting in the armchair by the window, looking out at the South Beach Sea. "Still there, staring into space? Your son works like a dog to maintain all this luxury, and you do nothing but sigh in corners." "I'm just resting, Penelope." "Resting from what? From sitting all day?" Penelope laughed, a cold laugh that made Graham shudder. "You know what I think? I think you fake all this fragility to keep your son tied to you. It's pathetic." Mrs. Louise lowered her head, not responding. Her fingers trembled slightly on the armrest. "I came to tell you that your precious son isn't coming home for dinner. He called to say he has an important meeting." Penelope moved closer, leaning in to speak near her mother-in-law's face. "Which means it'll be just you and me tonight. What a shame, isn't it? No little Graham to protect you." In another recording, Constance entered the room with a tray of medication. "Mrs. Louise, I brought your pills." "Thank you, Constance. You're an angel." I do what I can, Mrs. Louise. You don't deserve to go through this. Through what? Penelope's voice came from the hallway. The camera caught the two women's startle. What are you two whispering about? Nothing important, Mrs. Penelope. Just brought Mrs. Louise's medicine. I'll do that myself. I'm a nurse, remember. You're dismissed for the day, Constance. You can go home. But I haven't finished. I said you're dismissed. The tone brooked no argument. When Constance left, Penelope turned to Mrs. Louise with a cruel smile. Now give me those pills. I know exactly what you need to take. Graham felt a chill. Was Penelope altering his mother's medication? The most disturbing recording, however, took place in the living room. Mrs. Louise was trying to get up from the sofa with the help of her crutches when one of them slipped. Penelope, who was passing through the room, made no move to help. She just stopped and watched, as if enjoying the spectacle of her mother-in-law struggling. Penelope, can you help me, please? Mrs. Louise asked, trying to reach the fallen crutch. You know, Louise, sometimes I think you do this on purpose. You drop the crutch to get attention so everyone will rush to help you. No, you're pathetic. A useless old woman who just gets in the way. Do you know what Graham told me yesterday? That he's thinking of hiring a full-time nurse to take care of you, so that I can get my life back. Those were his words. The lie was so blatant that Graham almost smashed his computer monitor. He had never said such a thing. My son wouldn't say that, Mrs. Louise replied, with a firmness that surprised Graham. Oh, wouldn't he? And why not? Do you think he enjoys having an invalid mother dragging her crutches around the house? Do you think he doesn't realize how much you suffocate him? Why do you think he works so much? To stay away from here, away from you. It was then that Constance entered the room and saw the scene. What's going on here? Nothing that's any of your business, Penelope replied dryly. But Constance, to Graham's surprise, did not back down. She approached Mrs. Louise and helped her up, picking up the fallen crutch. Are you all right, Mrs. Louise? I am now, Constance. Thank you. You're overstepping your duties, Constance, Penelope warned, her voice laced with threat. Remember that I can fire you at any moment. You can try, Constance replied, holding her gaze, but I'm almost certain Mr. Graham wouldn't allow it. I've been in this house for 20 years. I looked after him when he was a teenager. I know all this family's secrets. I highly doubt he'd send me away on your whim. Penelope's face contorted with rage, but she didn't retort. Apparently, even she had limits to her cruelty, or at least feared the power Constance held over Graham. There were dozens of similar videos. Penelope hiding Mrs. Louise's crutches, making disparaging comments, ignoring her requests for help, controlling who could or could not visit her. In one, she even pushed the elderly woman when she was slow to move out of her way. But it was the last recording, the most recent one, that made Graham make a final decision. In it, Penelope entered Constance's room while she was making the bed. In her hands she held a small jewelry box. Constance, do you know what this is? Mrs. Louise's jewelry box. Exactly. And do you know what I found inside? Nothing. Her pearl necklace is gone, the one that belonged to Graham's grandmother. Impossible, Mrs. Penelope. Mrs. Louise would never lose that necklace. She guards it like a treasure. Well, it's gone, and you know what's most curious? Penelope took a threatening step forward. You were the only person in her room today, besides me. Constance paled, understanding the insinuation. You can't be thinking that I'm not thinking anything, I just find it strange. First the sapphire ring, now the necklace. Valuable items that disappear and then mysteriously reappear. You were the one who hid Mrs. Louise's ring last week. I saw you. Watch what you say, Constance. Be very careful. It would be your word against mine. And who do you think Graham would believe? His dedicated wife or the maid who might be stealing from her sick mother-in-law? Mr. Graham has known me for years. He would never what? Believe that you, who practically raised him, could be taking advantage of Mrs. Louise's fragility to steal her jewelry? Maybe not. But what if the jewelry were found among your belongings? In your mattress, for example. Horror spread across Constance's face as Penelope pulled the pearl necklace from her pocket and examined it with a cruel smile. It would be your word against physical evidence and against my testimony. After all, I would be the one to find the jewelry, wouldn't I? You wouldn't do that, wouldn't I? It all depends on you, Constance, on how you behave from now on. If you keep interfering when I'm disciplining Mrs. Louise, if you keep confronting me, well, accidents happen. Jewelry goes missing, maids get accused, fired, maybe even arrested. Constance sank onto the bed, her legs weak with fear and indignation. What do you want from me? I want you to stay out of my way, to keep quiet, do your job, and not question me. That's all. Is that too much to ask? Graham shut down the computer, unable to watch anymore. The anger he felt now was different, cold, calculating, determined. Penelope not only mistreated his mother, she was willing to destroy the life of Constance, an honest woman who had dedicated 2 decades of her life to his family. This would end tonight. When he arrived home earlier than usual, he found Penelope watching television in the living room. She smiled when she saw him, rising for a kiss that he dodged. "Is something wrong, love?" she asked, confused by the rejection. "Where is my mother?" "In her room, resting. It was a physical therapy day. She's always tired." "And Constance?" "She went to pick up her granddaughter from school. Is there a problem, Graham? You're acting strange." Without answering, Graham walked to his study and opened his laptop. He connected it to the living room television with an HDMI cable. "What are you doing?" Penelope's voice now had a slight tremor. "Watching a movie. I want you to watch it with me." When the first recording began to play, Penelope yelling at Mrs. Louise in her room, the color drained from the woman's face. "What is this? You spied on me." The indignation in her voice would have sounded convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth. Spying implies an invasion of privacy. "But this is my house, Penelope. I installed cameras on my property because I suspected something was wrong here, and I was right." The recording continued. Scene after scene of cruelty, humiliation, threats. Penelope remained motionless on the sofa, watching her own malice displayed on the large living room screen. When the last recording ended, Penelope threatening to frame Constance, Graham turned off the television. The ensuing silence was deafening. "I have 112 more hours of similar recordings," he finally said, his voice dangerously controlled. "Every minute showing who you really are behind the mask of the perfect wife. Graham, I can explain." "Explain what? How you mistreat my mother, how you threaten Constance, how you lie, manipulate, and destroy the peace in my home." He took a step forward, his body trembling with restrained anger. "There is no possible explanation for what I saw, Penelope. None. Your mother provokes me. She's hated me from the beginning. She does everything to separate us. Constance helps her. They're both against me. I was just defending myself." The pathetic attempt to justify the unjustifiable only increased the contempt Graham felt. "My mother is 72 years old. She uses crutches. She is still mourning the loss of my father. And you torture her psychologically, hide her crutches, humiliate her. What kind of monster does that?" "I'm not a monster," Penelope screamed, tears streaming down her face and smudging her perfect makeup. "I just wanted us to be happy, just the two of us. She was always between us. Always. She is my mother. The woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, who supported every step of my life. And I entrusted her to your care." Graham's voice broke. "That was my biggest mistake." "Graham, please. Enough, Penelope. It's over. I want you out of this house now." "You can't do this. I'm your wife." "Not for long. I've already called my lawyer. The divorce papers will be ready tomorrow morning." Graham went to the side table and picked up an envelope. "Here's $10,000 in cash. It's more than enough for you to settle somewhere until everything is legally resolved. Take your personal things and leave. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house too. I have rights. The rights you had, you lost the moment you raised your voice to my mother. And if you want to discuss legal rights, I suggest you consider carefully. I have enough evidence for a lawsuit for elder abuse, attempted framing, threats, psychological violence. I can ruin not only your financial future, but your reputation, your freedom." For the first time, Penelope seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Her face, previously contorted in false indignation, now showed real fear. "You wouldn't do that." "Try me," Graham replied, his eyes as cold as steel. At that moment, the living room door opened and Mrs. Louise entered, leaning on her crutches. Behind her, Constance watched the scene with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "My son," Mrs. Louise began, her voice choked with emotion. "Mom, did you hear?" Mrs. Louise nodded. Everything. Constance showed me the cameras in my room. We saw you in the living room and... Nosy old woman! Penelope lunged towards Mrs. Louise, but Graham caught her by the arm. Not one more step, Penelope. Not one more word against my mother. The look they exchanged was charged with hatred. Penelope knew she had lost. You'll regret this, Graham Montgomery. No one humiliates me like this and gets away with it. Your threats mean nothing to me. Now get out of my house before I forget I was raised to respect women. With a final, furious glare, Penelope marched to the bedroom. 20 minutes later, she left the apartment dragging 2 large suitcases. She didn't look back. When the elevator doors closed, Graham felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He turned to his mother, who was watching him with teary eyes. Mum, I'm so sorry for everything, for not realizing, for not being here. Mrs. Louise approached, touching her son's face with a trembling hand. You couldn't have known my son. She was very convincing. I should have noticed, I should have asked. The important thing is that now we know the truth, and we can start over. Graham hugged his mother carefully, afraid of hurting her. Then he looked at Constance, who remained at the door. Constance, how can I ever thank you for everything you did for my mother, for protecting her when I wasn't here? No need to thank me, Mr. Graham. Mrs. Louise is like family to me. Real family takes care of each other. Family. The word echoed in Graham's mind as he led his mother to the sofa. They had much to talk about, much to rebuild. But now, finally, they could begin to heal the wounds Penelope had left. Outside the penthouse, on the ground floor of the luxurious building, Penelope got into a taxi, her face disfigured by rage. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Graham Montgomery would pay dearly for humiliating her this way. It was only a matter of time. 2 weeks had passed since Penelope's stormy departure from the Montgomery penthouse. Life in the South Beach apartment had changed drastically, for the better. Mrs. Louise, free from the psychological terror she had been subjected to, was gradually returning to the vibrant woman Graham knew. She still used crutches, but her physical therapy sessions seemed to yield better results, now that constant stress wasn't sabotaging her recovery. Graham continued to accompany his mother to the clinic, no longer in disguise but as himself, the attentive son who now made it a point to be actively involved in his mother's life. During these visits, he began to notice the Deborah that Mrs. Louise had mentioned. She was a simple young woman around 32, with curly hair tied in a casual bun, brown skin, and a smile that lit up the entire room. Deborah worked as a general services assistant at the clinic, responsible for cleaning and organization. But Graham noticed she did much more than that. She knew each patient's name, remembered their stories, offered words of encouragement, or just a quiet presence when needed. "Look who's here," Deborah exclaimed upon seeing Mrs. Louise enter the clinic leaning on Graham. "Mrs. Louise, you have such wonderful color today." "It's because I'm finally sleeping well, my dear," Mrs. Louise replied with a genuine smile. "Deborah, this is my son, Graham. Graham, this is the young lady I've told you so much about." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Montgomery," Deborah said, extending her hand with a cordial respect that wasn't subservience. "The pleasure is all mine, Deborah. My mother speaks very highly of you, says you're a ray of sunshine in this place." Deborah blushed slightly. "Your mother is very kind. I just do my job." "No, my dear," Mrs. Louise interrupted, holding Deborah's hand warmly. "You do much more than your job. You treat us like people, not patients or problems to be solved." While Mrs. Louise was taken to her session, Graham asked for a few minutes of Deborah's time. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you've done for my mother. She's been through some very difficult times recently, and your small kindnesses have meant the world to her." "There's no need to thank me, Mr. Montgomery. Mrs. Louise is special. She reminds me a lot of my grandmother, who raised me, the same sweetness, the same inner strength." There was something in Deborah's simplicity and sincerity that touched Graham. No artifice, no attempt to impress or win favors, just genuine humanity. Something he, surrounded by self-serving and opportunistic people in the corporate world, rarely encountered. In the following weeks, Graham started arriving at the clinic earlier and leaving later, finding small pretexts to talk with Deborah. He discovered she had been an orphan since she was 15, raised by a grandmother who had passed away 5 years ago. She worked at the clinic during the day and studied at night. She was in her final semester of education. "I've always wanted to be a teacher," she told him during an impromptu coffee at the cafe across from the clinic, "especially for underprivileged children who need someone to believe in them." "Why?" Graham asked, genuinely interested. "Because I was one of them. When my parents were gone, many people said I wouldn't have a future, that I'd end up like so many other girls from my neighborhood, pregnant early, without an education, without prospects. But my grandmother believed in me. And a high school teacher, Mrs. Sullivan, did too. She saw something in me that I couldn't even see in myself. I want to do that for other children." Graham found himself enchanted by the strength and determination of this simple woman who, despite so many obstacles, remained firm in her dreams and principles. She was so different from the women he usually associated with, women like Penelope, who saw in him only the financial empire he had built. One Saturday, after Mrs. Louise's session, Graham invited Deborah to have lunch with them. To his surprise, she politely declined. "I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Montgomery, but on Saturdays I volunteer at the Rebirth Support House. It's a shelter for children undergoing cancer treatment." "I see, perhaps another day." "Actually," Mrs. Louise interjected, "why don't we go with Deborah? I would love to see that place." The light in Deborah's eyes at the suggestion was answer enough. The Rebirth House was in an old 2-story building in Little Havana, a middle-class neighborhood in Miami. There, Graham encountered a reality completely different from his own. Children from various parts of the country, accompanied by their mothers or relatives, stayed at the house while undergoing treatment at the city's public hospitals. Many came from the rural South, from Appalachia, from remote places where adequate cancer treatment was unavailable. Deborah was a sort of jack of all trades there. She told stories, helped with meals, taught basic lessons so the children wouldn't fall completely behind in school. And most importantly, she listened to both the children and their families, offering the kind of comfort that can only come from someone who has known suffering. "Did you lose someone to cancer?" Graham asked, as they watched a girl of about 7 drawing under Deborah's gentle supervision. Something changed in her eyes, a shadow, an old pain that had never fully healed. "My son," she replied simply. "He was 3 months old when we discovered a neuroblastoma. We fought for almost a year, but we couldn't win." The revelation hit Graham like a punch. Deborah had been a mother. She had lost a child. And yet, instead of surrendering to bitterness or resentment, she dedicated her time to helping other sick children. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You couldn't have known. It was 7 years ago. His father left us when he found out about the illness, said he couldn't stand hospitals, that he didn't have the strength. I was left alone with my boy and my grandmother. When Joaquin passed, I thought I would die with him. It was the worst pain I've ever felt." "And how did you move on?" "One day at a time. In the beginning, it was seconds at a time, then hours, until one day I realized I could use my pain to help others who were going through the same thing. That's when I started volunteering here." Graham looked at Deborah with new eyes. This fragile-looking woman carried an inner strength that he, with all his financial empire and power, had never needed to develop. A quiet courage that came not from the absence of fear, but from the ability to keep going despite it. That day, on their way home, Mrs. Louise commented to her son, "She's special, isn't she?" "Yes," Graham replied thoughtfully. "Very special. Different from all the women you've ever known. Completely different. And that's a good thing, my son. You need someone real in your life, someone who sees the man behind the businessman, not the other way around." Mrs. Louise's words resonated in Graham's mind for days. He realized his mother was right. All his previous relationships, including the disastrous marriage to Penelope, had been based on his social position, his money, his influence. Never on the man he truly was, with his insecurities, his fears, his flaws. In the following weeks, Graham created more and more opportunities to be with Deborah. He began to frequent the Rebirth House regularly, first as a visitor, then as a volunteer himself. He discovered a satisfaction that no multi-million-dollar contract had ever given him in seeing a child smile when he told them stories or simply played ball in the small backyard. Mrs. Louise also got involved, teaching knitting and crochet to the mothers and companions of the children. It was as if a new life was opening up for the Montgomerys, a life not measured by the size of their bank account or social status, but by the depth of the human connections they were making. On a particularly hot Sunday in February, Graham invited Deborah for a walk in Coconut Grove. They strolled peacefully through the shaded paths, talking about everything and nothing, when he finally worked up the courage to ask, "Deborah, I was wondering if you would have dinner with me sometime. Just the two of us." She stopped, looking at him with an expression that was hard to decipher. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean, why?" "Why do you want to have dinner with me, Graham? I'm a cleaner. You're one of the richest businessmen in Miami. We don't move in the same circles. We don't have the same lifestyle. Why me?" The direct honesty of the question demanded equal honesty in return. "Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like one of the richest businessmen in Miami. I just feel like Graham, the man, not the empire. And it's the first time in a long time, maybe in my life, that this has happened." Deborah studied him for a moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. "Graham, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm not looking for a relationship. My life is complicated enough between work, college, and volunteering. And honestly, I'm scared. Scared of getting involved and getting hurt again, like what happened with my son's father." "I understand," Graham replied, trying to hide his disappointment. "I respect your decision. But," she continued, "I will have dinner with you, as friends. No expectations, no pressure. Can we start there?" The smile that lit up Graham's face was answer enough. The friends' dinner took place the following week. Not in a luxury restaurant as Graham had initially planned, but at Deborah's own home, a small one-bedroom apartment in Wynwood. She insisted on cooking, saying she preferred an environment where they could talk without being disturbed. The apartment was simple but cozy. Photos of her grandmother and her son decorated the walls. Education and children's literature books filled a makeshift bookshelf. Everything there spoke of a modest but dignified and purposeful life. Graham felt strangely at ease in this space, so different from his South Beach penthouse. There was an authenticity to Deborah's home that his lavish, professionally decorated rooms would never possess. They had a fish stew, my grandmother's recipe, she was from Louisiana, and talked late into the night about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Graham spoke of the pressure of managing the company his father had built, of the constant fear of not living up to his father's legacy. Deborah shared her insecurities about finishing college so late, about being the oldest student in the class. When Graham finally left, it was well past midnight. At the door, he gathered his courage and lightly touched Deborah's face. "Thank you for tonight. It was real." She smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. "Good night, Graham." In the months that followed, their relationship blossomed slowly, like a plant that needs special care to grow. There were no grand declarations or spectacular gestures, just small moments of true connection, building a solid foundation of trust and mutual respect. Deborah got to know Mrs. Louise better, who welcomed her with open arms. The two women, so different in background and experience, developed a genuine friendship. Graham often found them on the penthouse balcony, tending together to the orchids that had returned to beautify the apartment. It was on one of those afternoons, watching his mother and Deborah chatting animatedly while watering the plants, that Graham realized he was in love, not with the overwhelming theatrical passion he had felt for Penelope, but with a deeper, more serene, and infinitely more real feeling. That same evening, after dropping Deborah home after a dinner at the penthouse, Graham held her hands and finally said what his heart had known for weeks. "Deborah, I know we agreed to be just friends, and I respect that. But I have to be honest with you. I'm falling in love. And not for what you do or what you represent, but for who you are. This incredible, strong, generous woman who transforms the lives of everyone around her." Deborah looked at him with eyes shining with unshed tears. "Graham, I'm so scared. Our worlds are so different, and I have so much to lose." "So do I," he replied. "More than you can imagine, because for the first time I've found someone who sees me for who I really am. And that is the most precious thing I've ever had in my life." When their lips met, it was as if one cycle was closing and another was opening. A kiss that promised not wealth or status but companionship, respect and a shared journey, whatever path they chose to follow. Neither of them noticed the figure watching them from across the street. Penelope, hidden in the shadow of a tree, watched the scene with a hatred that grew with every second. Her plans for revenge, which had been forming since she was kicked out of the penthouse, gained a new target at that moment. It wasn't enough to destroy Graham financially. Now she wanted to see him suffer emotionally too, and she had just discovered exactly how to do it. The relationship between Graham and Deborah flourished with each passing day. After 3 months together, she finally accepted his invitation to move into the South Beach penthouse, albeit with a few conditions. She would keep her apartment in Wynwood, where she could retreat when she needed space, and continue working at the clinic until she graduated with her education degree. "I don't want to be supported, Graham. I need my independence," she explained, and he respected it. It was precisely this strength of character that had attracted him from the beginning. Mrs. Louise, who already considered Deborah a daughter, couldn't have been happier. Her physical therapy sessions yielded increasingly better results, and she could now walk around the house with just a single cane instead of 2 crutches. She even started attending an art history course for seniors at the Lifelong Learning Institute, where she made new friends and rediscovered the joy of learning. Constance, ever watchful and loyal, commented to Graham one morning as he had his coffee. "I haven't seen Mrs. Louise this happy since your father passed, Mr. Graham. Deborah's presence in this house has been a blessing." "Yes, Constance. It seems we're finally finding peace after the storm." Little did he know that a new storm was forming on the horizon. One Wednesday, while Mrs. Louise was attending a lecture at the university, she received an unexpected visitor during the break. Penelope, elegantly dressed as always, approached with a forced smile. "What a surprise to find you here, Mrs. Louise. I see you're much better. You almost don't need the cane anymore." Mrs. Louise turned pale. She hadn't seen Penelope since she left the penthouse, and now her former daughter-in-law appeared out of nowhere, like a snake ready to strike. "What are you doing here, Penelope?" "I came to attend a lecture on contemporary art. I've always been interested in the subject, you know." The lie was obvious, but Penelope continued. "I heard your son is in a new relationship. A cleaning lady, isn't it? How peculiar." Mrs. Louise drew herself up as tall as she could, leaning firmly on her cane. "Deborah is an extraordinary woman. She's worth more than many people with diplomas and important last names." "Oh, I'm sure she is. So simple girl. Grew up in a rough neighborhood, didn't she? Works cleaning floors. Truly an interesting choice for the heir to the Montgomery Empire. But tell me, Mrs. Louise, has she told you about her past? About the son she had? About the child's father?" The way Penelope pronounced those words made Mrs. Louise shudder. There was something venomous there, a malicious insinuation she couldn't quite decipher. "I don't know what you're talking about, and frankly, I'm not interested in hearing your lies, Penelope." "Excuse me." When she tried to walk away, Penelope grabbed her arm, hard enough to hurt. "I'm sure your son would love to know exactly who he's brought into his home. Maybe I should tell him. Let go of my arm, Penelope, now." To Mrs. Louise's surprise, Deborah appeared at that moment, coming down the hall. She worked part-time in the university's administration office to supplement her income while finishing her degree, something Mrs. Louise knew, but apparently Penelope did not. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Louise?" Deborah asked, approaching quickly when she saw the elderly woman's discomfort. Penelope released Mrs. Louise's arm and turned to face Deborah, a cruel smile on her lips. "Well, look who's here. The new lady of the penthouse. We were just talking about you." "Penelope, please go away," Mrs. Louise pleaded, but her former daughter-in-law ignored her. "Do you really think this is going to last?" Penelope addressed Deborah, who remained calm, though her eyes betrayed confusion. "A cleaning lady and one of the richest men in Miami. It's almost comical. How long do you think it will be before he gets tired of you, before he realizes you don't belong in his world?" "I don't know who you are," Deborah replied firmly, "but I ask you to respect Mrs. Louise and leave." "You don't know who I am? Seriously?" Penelope laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "I'm Penelope Vance Montgomery, Graham's wife. Or ex-wife, if you prefer, though our divorce isn't finalized yet." Other people were starting to watch the scene, drawn by the raised voices. "If you're his ex-wife, then I don't see why this conversation should continue," Deborah said, placing herself protectively beside Mrs. Louise. "Let's go, Mrs. Louise. The second part of the lecture is about to start." "Running away, are we? Just like your son's father ran away when he found out about the illness?" Penelope's words were like daggers, clearly meant to wound. Or are you going to tell Graham you were abandoned by a man who couldn't handle the pressure? What version did you tell? Deborah's face turned pale. How did this woman know so much about her private life? I don't know what you want or why you're doing this, but it's not going to work, she replied, maintaining her composure despite the internal turmoil. I just want you to know that I know exactly who you are, Deborah Santos. Grew up in a neighborhood like Overtown, lost your parents at 15, got pregnant at 24 by a man who left you when the baby got sick, a baby who didn't make it. A touching story, really. Perfect for winning the sympathy of a rich man and his vulnerable mother. That's enough, Penelope, Graham's voice thundered down the hallway. He had just arrived to pick up his mother, as he did every Wednesday, and had overheard part of the conversation. Don't you dare speak to Deborah or my mother like that. Graham, what a pleasant surprise. We were just having such an interesting conversation about the past of your new companion. Penelope's smile was pure venom. Get out of here now before I forget what little respect I still have for you, Graham ordered, moving to stand by Mrs. Louise and Deborah. Respect? You're the one who humiliated me, who kicked me out of my own home like a criminal. You know very well why. Now for the last time, leave. A small circle of onlookers had formed, many of them seniors who attended the same courses as Mrs. Louise. Penelope, realizing she had lost control of the situation, decided to make one last attempt to wound them. Have you told your family about the benefits of being with such a humble woman, Graham? Or are you going to deny that you're with her only because she represents everything I wasn't? A submissive pauper you can control, unlike me. The difference between you and Deborah, Graham replied in a controlled but firm voice, is that she has something no amount of money can buy: character, integrity, humanity, things that you, with all your pedigree and expensive education, will never understand. Turning to the onlookers, Graham continued, This woman mistreated my elderly mother for months. I have video evidence. She threatened our housekeeper. She tried to manipulate me, and now she comes here to try to destroy my happiness because she can't stand to see us move on without her. Penelope, finding herself publicly exposed, lost her composure. You will regret this, Graham Montgomery. I will sue you for every penny you have, for abandonment, for cheating, for everything. Do it, he replied calmly. I can't wait to present the recordings of your behavior with my mother to the judge. Defeated and humiliated, Penelope strode away, casting one last look of hatred at the trio. When she was gone, Graham turned to Deborah, who looked shaken. Are you okay? I am, but how did she know so much about me? About my son? She must have hired someone to investigate your past. Penelope is obsessive and vindictive. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It's not your fault, Deborah replied, still processing what had happened. But Graham, there's something I need to clear up. About what she said. You don't have to explain anything, he interrupted, holding her hands. I know you, I know your heart. Whatever Penelope said or insinuated doesn't change what I feel. Even so, I want you to know everything. No secrets between us. That night at the penthouse, Deborah told Graham and Mrs. Louise her full story. How she met Philip, her son's father, a medical student who abandoned her when the baby was diagnosed with neuroblastoma. How she fought alone with only her grandmother's help to give little Joaquin the best possible treatment. How, after her son's passing, she fell into a deep depression, only to be saved by volunteering with other sick children. I'm not ashamed of my past, she concluded. I just don't talk about it much because it still hurts, but I never lied to you. I never hid who I am. And that's why we love you, Mrs. Louise replied, hugging her, for being exactly who you are. The next morning, as Penelope had promised, Graham received a notification. His ex-wife was filing a contentious divorce suit, alleging abandonment and infidelity, and demanding half of all his assets, including shares in the construction company. She doesn't have a case, assured Mr. Mendez, Graham's lawyer, after reviewing the suit, especially with the evidence we have against her. But we need to prepare for an ugly process. She's going to try to drag your name through the mud, tarnish your reputation. Do what's necessary, Graham instructed. I won't let her intimidate or harm us any further. The following weeks were tense. As predicted, Penelope used every resource at her disposal to defame Graham. Stories planted in gossip columns insinuated that he had cheated on his wife with the maid, incorrectly describing Deborah, that he was abusive, that he had forced Penelope out of the house under threat. Deborah suffered from the stares and whispers, whenever she accompanied Graham to a public event. Even at the clinic where everyone knew her, some wealthier patients began to treat her with disdain after reading the sensationalist news. "Maybe I should step back for a while," she suggested one night after a particularly uncomfortable dinner where they were practically stared out of a restaurant. "Until this is all over, go back to my apartment. Give it time for the dust to settle." "That's exactly what she wants," Graham replied. "To separate us, to make us doubt. I won't give her that satisfaction. The final hearing is tomorrow. After that, we can finally turn the page." The next day at the courthouse, Penelope arrived accompanied by a lawyer famous for his aggression. She looked confident, almost arrogant. Graham, Deborah, and Mrs. Louise, who insisted on attending despite her mobility issues, remained serene, confident in the truth that protected them. The hearing began with Penelope's lawyer presenting his claims: a marriage destroyed by infidelity, a devoted wife kicked out of her home, deprived of her rights. He spoke of the mistress, looking directly at Deborah, as an opportunist who saw a chance for social climbing in the family's vulnerability. When it was the defense's turn, Mr. Mendez rose calmly. "Your Honor, before refuting the unfounded accusations from the opposing party, I would like to present some evidence that will show the true character of Mrs. Penelope Vance and the real reasons that led to the end of this marriage." With the judge's permission, he projected the videos Graham had recorded in the courtroom. Penelope humiliating Mrs. Louise, hiding her crutches, pushing her, the attempt to frame Constance for stealing jewelry, the threats, the manipulations, all exposed in high definition. Penelope's face transformed as the videos were shown. Confidence gave way to panic, then to rage. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming invasion of privacy, but the judge allowed the recordings to continue. When the lights came on again, the silence in the room was absolute. Penelope seemed smaller, diminished by the truth she could no longer deny. "As you can see, Your Honor," Mr. Mendez continued, "there was no abandonment or infidelity on my client's part. What happened was the discovery of systematic abuse against Mrs. Louise Montgomery, a 72-year-old woman, by Mrs. Penelope. My client acted to protect his mother from further psychological and physical violence. As for Mr. Montgomery's current relationship, it began months after the de facto separation, thus not constituting infidelity or any reason that would justify the exorbitant financial demands of the opposing party." The judge, visibly impacted by the evidence, asked Penelope to respond. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she ignored him, standing up. "The videos were edited," she claimed, her trembling voice contradicting the firmness she tried to project. "They only show selected parts. Mrs. Louise constantly provoked me, tried to push me away from Graham. I was only reacting." "Reacting by hiding an elderly woman's crutches?" the judge asked, not hiding his disapproval. "By threatening a housekeeper with false accusations of theft? By pushing a lady with reduced mobility? You consider these proportional reactions?" Cornered, Penelope changed her strategy. I wasn't well. The marriage was suffocating me. I felt trapped, controlled. Graham is possessive, jealous. I needed space, freedom. Freedom that you found by mistreating a defenseless elderly woman?" The irony in the judge's voice was lost on no one. "Mrs. Vance, I have seen sufficient evidence of abusive behavior on your part. This court not only rejects your financial demands, but is also considering potential criminal charges for elder abuse. Do you have anything further to say in your defense?" For the first time since he had met her, Graham saw Penelope completely speechless. Her face, always so controlled, so perfect, crumbled into a mask of pure hatred. "This isn't over," she muttered, before quickly leaving the courtroom, ignoring her own lawyer's calls. A week later, the judgment was published. The divorce was granted, with Penelope receiving only what she had brought into the marriage, some jewelry and personal items. Furthermore, she was ordered to pay compensation to Mrs. Louise for moral damages and to stay away from the Montgomery family for at least 5 years under penalty of detention. The legal victory brought relief, but also a strange melancholy. That night, watching the Miami skyline from his balcony, Graham reflected on how a person so seemingly perfect could hide such cruelty. "What are you thinking about?" Deborah asked, joining him. "About how fragile we are. How we look for what people seem to be, not who they really are." Deborah intertwined her fingers with his. "That's why we need time. To know not just the surface, but the depth. Graham smiled, squeezing her hand lightly. You're the deepest person I've ever met, you know that? That same night, under the starry Miami sky, Graham asked Deborah to marry him, not with an ostentatious ring, as he had with Penelope, but with a simple band that had belonged to his grandmother, Mrs. Louise's mother. It's not expensive or luxurious, but it carries my family's history, the love that lasted for decades between my grandparents. It's a symbol of a real commitment, not of status or appearances. Deborah, with tears in her eyes, accepted. And when Graham told Mrs. Louise the news, the elderly woman simply smiled and said, "Finally, I'll have the daughter I always dreamed of." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a rented apartment in Mid-Beach, Penelope watched for the 1,000th time the videos of her humiliation in court, which someone had recorded on a phone and posted online. Her face, once beautiful, was marked by deep dark circles and lines of bitterness. On the table beside her, a half-empty glass of whiskey and several scattered pills. The defeat had not only deprived her of a fortune she had already counted on, but it had destroyed her reputation in the social circles she so cherished. No one invited her to events anymore. Old friends didn't answer her calls. She was, for the first time in her life, truly alone. And it was in this solitude that an idea began to form. An idea that, in her altered state, seemed perfect. If she couldn't have the life of luxury she desired, if she couldn't have Graham back, at least she would have her revenge. A definitive revenge that would destroy not only the man who had rejected her, but everything he loved. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and typed a message to a number she never thought she would use, the number of an old boyfriend who had questionable connections and owed her a few favors. "I need your help. It's time to call in that favor you owe me." The reply came almost immediately. "What do you need?" Penelope smiled, a smile devoid of any joy or humanity. "I want to destroy someone. Completely." 4 months passed since the trial. The Montgomery family's life had found a new rhythm. Graham had reduced his work hours to spend more time with Deborah and Mrs. Louise. The company continued to thrive, now with social projects, including the construction of a new headquarters for the Rebirth House. Deborah had completed her education degree and started an educational project within the construction company, a school for employees' children and children from the community. Mrs. Louise surprised everyone with her recovery, walking with only a light cane. Preparations for Graham and Deborah's wedding were underway. It would be a simple ceremony at their beach house in the Florida Keys, nothing like the social spectacle his wedding to Penelope had been. Speaking of Penelope, no one had heard from her since the trial. "Do you think she's given up?" Deborah asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the balcony. "I don't know. It doesn't seem like her to accept defeat, but maybe she realized it's not worth wasting more energy on us." "I hope so. She needs to rebuild her own life, not destroy others." The next morning, Graham was in his office when his secretary announced an unexpected visitor. Penelope was in reception, insisting on seeing him. The woman who entered his office was unrecognizable, thin with deep dark circles and a feverish look that betrayed sleepless nights. Her clothes, though expensive, seemed unkempt. "What do you want, Penelope?" "I'll get straight to the point. I did something terrible. Or I almost did. And I need to fix it before it's too late." "What are you talking about?" "After the trial, I wasn't well. In a moment of desperation, I contacted an old boyfriend, Edward, who has dangerous connections. I asked him to harm you, your company, sabotage on one of your sites, the daycare center on the west side." Graham felt a chill. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I regret it. 3 days after I spoke to Edward, I overdosed. I mixed alcohol with pills. I almost died. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. There I realized I was destroying myself in an attempt to destroy you." "And this Edward? Did he go through with the plan?" "When I got out of the hospital, I begged him to forget the request. He agreed, but I'm not absolutely sure. That's why I'm here, so you can check the site." Graham immediately called his chief engineer, ordering a full inspection of the daycare under construction. "Why did you really come to tell me this, Penelope?" "Because I needed to see your eyes, to know if there was any remnant of compassion." She smiled sadly. "Be happy, Graham. You and your family deserve it." The next day, the inspection report confirmed no signs of sabotage were found. A week later, Graham found a small note in the classifieds. GM, thank you for checking. Relieved nothing was found. I'm moving on. Sorry for everything. PV. The wedding took place on a sunny afternoon. Mrs. Louise, radiant in a light blue dress, walked down the aisle without a cane. A small victory that moved everyone. Deborah appeared in a simple white silk dress, her curly hair adorned with small flowers, carrying orchids she grew with Mrs. Louise. The ceremony was brief and emotional. The vows spoke of overcoming unlikely encounters and second chances. During the reception, Mrs. Louise commented to Graham, "Your father would be proud of you today, my son, not for the absence of mistakes, but for what you did after making them." 2 years passed. The daycare on the West Side had become a model for other initiatives. Mrs. Louise coordinated a craft program for seniors, in addition to her volunteer work. Then Graham received an unexpected call from his lawyer. "Penelope Vance has been in touch. She's back in Miami after 2 years in Atlanta, where she underwent psychological treatment. She needs a job and asked if you would consider giving her an opportunity at the construction company, something simple, administrative." When he told Deborah and Mrs. Louise about the request, their reactions were surprisingly similar. "If she's really changed, maybe she deserves a second chance," said Mrs. Louise. "I agree," added Deborah. "Denying someone the chance to start over goes against everything we believe in." 2 days later, Graham interviewed Penelope. The woman who entered his office was transformed, simpler, more natural, without the previous air of desperation. "Why do you want to work at my company, Penelope? There are so many places where it would be easier to start over, away from our history." "Because I need to close this circle correctly, by facing the consequences of my choices and showing that I am capable of changing." "I'll give you a chance, Penelope. A single chance. No contact with my family." "Understood. And thank you, really." To everyone's surprise, Penelope proved to be exemplary, punctual, efficient, discreet. At a Christmas party, Graham watched as she approached Mrs. Louise and spoke briefly, with tears in her eyes. "She asked for forgiveness," Mrs. Louise explained later. "A sincere forgiveness from the soul. And I told her that forgiveness is a process, not an event, that I'm working on it day by day." The following spring, Deborah announced her pregnancy. The birth of Sophia Louise brought new joy to the family. Mrs. Way Louise, now a great-grandmother, seemed rejuvenated by her great-granddaughter. "She gives me a reason to keep going, to stay longer." Life went on. Sophia grew strong and healthy. Deborah expanded her educational project to 10 units. Graham delegated part of the construction company's management to dedicate himself to social causes. Penelope remained at the company, rebuilding her life and repairing her mistakes. 20 years passed. Sophia, now a doctor, had followed in her mother's footsteps in volunteering. Mrs. Louise, at 94, remained surprisingly active, though she needed a wheelchair. On a quiet afternoon in Naples, Graham and Mrs. Louise were talking about the past. "You know, my son, when your father passed, I thought my life was over. How wrong I was." "You've had an incredible life, Mom." "Yes, thanks to all of you. I regret nothing, not even the difficult times, because each one of them brought us here." Graham held his mother's wrinkled hand. "And here is a very good place to be. The best possible." As the sun disappeared over the horizon, Graham reflected on his journey. The mistakes, the successes, the pains, the joys, all intertwined in a complex and rich tapestry. And at the center of that tapestry was love, not the superficial love based on appearances, but real deep love that survives storms, that forgives, that rebuilds, that transforms. A love capable of healing wounds, overcoming trauma, conquering malice, and building an entirely new reality. A reality where what truly matters is not status, power, or money, but kindness, respect, and sincere affection between people. Because in the end, that is the only thing that remains, the only legacy truly worth leaving. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Graham and his family has deeply touched your hearts. We've seen how true love has the power to transform lives, heal old wounds, and create new beginnings even in the darkest of times. For more emotional stories like this, which explore the complexity and beauty of human relationships, be sure to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. Leave a like if this narrative stirred emotions in you, and share in the comments which moment touched your heart the most. Every week we bring new stories to move, inspire, and make you reflect. After all, as we learned from Mrs. Louise, what truly matters is not status, power, or money, but kindness, respect, and sincere affection between people. Until our next story,